Hello, very beautiful community. We're going to talk in a constructive way about Trump visiting the Joe Rogan podcast. But before, let's send our love to Georgia, the country that's having a precarious election while caught between Russian influence and Western retreat. On a personal note, I'm caught between some physical crises around microvascular damage and heart stuff, so I am going to just do my best talking to you and be as present as I can be, and all I can do is just be as much here as I can. Now, before Rogan and Trump met on the podcast, Trump did his McDonald's stunt. And my assessment of the McDonald's stunt was that it was, on balance, effective. Now, of course, that's always a complicated question, especially at such a late stage in an election, because you're talking about very small numbers of people and very particular kinds of demographics. But if we're to be cartoonish about it, that McDonald's stunt clownified Trump and humanized Trump in a way that, unfortunately, had a small effect on dissolving this perception of him, which is actually correct, as a potential authoritarian. I will talk about Trump and politics and discourse as we go through the podcast, which I endured so you don't have to. It's sort of something I could half listen to while dealing with health challenges. And at the end, I'll say something I'm afraid quite critical about the Joe Rogan perspective on this. Rogan's first question was, you've been attacked in such a coordinated way, how on earth do you cope with that? But that was just a quick aside, and the first real question was, what was it like to get in to office? How did you experience this? And Trump couldn't answer that question. It was just an emotional question. What did it feel like? And Trump couldn't answer. Perhaps that question was asked on minute 2, minute 3 of the conversation. Minute 12, Trump is still unable to answer. He's talked about how he got shot. He talked about how he built some buildings in response to a question about how he felt upon taking up the office. So Rogan interjects on minute 12 and re-asks, so tell me, what was it like to get in? And Trump continues to meander, or as he puts it, weave. Minute 15, Rogan interjects again. So let's come back to the question, what were your expectations coming in, and how were they different to what you actually experienced there? That's minute 15. Between minute 15 and minute 31, we're talking about the Lincoln bedroom in the White House. We're talking about the Civil War. Trump's giving some bad history of the Civil War. Minute 31, Rogan cuts in again, with Trump having not answered the question in 30 minutes. And Rogan says, your weaves are beginning to be very wide apart now, so let's try to hone this in. And by that time, I think they're moving to the question of how Trump began to think about his first hires, because that's the only thing that Trump gave Rogan in that half an hour of quote-unquote weaving. It was a few mentions of this challenge of having to appoint people. It's the only thing Rogan could cling on to. I have in front of me a verbatim printout of Trump's answer to one of the semi-adversarial questions that Rogan asked about election denial. Now, I'm actually not going to read it because with my current health situation, I don't have the energy to deal with YouTube nonsense, because there's always a chance that the silly algorithm, if some dodgy bots try to attack the video, assumes that you are saying that rather than attributing it to Trump. But basically, it was 40 to 60% word salad. You know, beautiful community is asking Vlad, what's it like to be sitting up here and talking with us? And I say, it's really great to be here. I have a piece of paper here with the Trump quote. I love real pieces of paper. I don't like looking at the screen. I still like printing things. I like a lot of physical things. And I don't love technology so much. I love wood. I love wood. I love a really nice table. There are many different materials a table can be made out of. There are many, many really perfect tables, incredible tables that nobody's ever seen, but I've seen them, and I think they're really, really, really absolutely incredible. There's a lot to look at. It's a beautiful world. Many people say it isn't, but I think it's a very beautiful world. And just look at the sky, many stars, and sometimes you can't see them. You call this thing pollution. Now, I don't like the climate, but the pollution, you've got to be able to see the stars. Unbelievable, unbelievable. If you're tall, it can help. You know, my son, 6'9". So it was that. Now, the reason I've just done this is because there's an important principle that we've already encountered, and that is that we've got to be able to have an honest conversation about the psychology of people with immense political power. I lost you, beautiful community. So let's pick this up where we left off. The psychology of people who wield immense political power. When we're talking about that, in Trump's case, we're going to look in two directions. The first direction is going to be narcissism. And let me just say something cartoonish first, but perhaps personally practical, and that's that if you are unsure about narcissism, or you can't recognize it, or you don't have the emotional intelligence you feel to read somebody as being a narcissist or not, one imperfect but useful test is to share a piece of really meaningful good news that you have with a narcissist, because they will be unable to react to that adequately. They will be unable to hold your good news, or unable to not make hearing about it ultimately something that's about themselves. Now, you can find out about somebody's narcissism by sharing bad news too, but good news tends to be much more easy at sort of revealing what needs to be revealed here. Trump talked about the public health crisis in a way that made him out to be the victim of it, as opposed to all the US citizens who got disabled or lost their lives. And he talked about how he's going to have a great election, as though it's just a commercial product. And that incapacity to acknowledge the variation in seriousness between spheres of human life, right? From buying candy to entertaining, starting or stopping a war, right, is a feature of a narcissistic personality disorder. But that's not the only thing we have to talk about. We have to gently talk about a second thing. And here I'm going to be both clear but also cautious, again, because we're having this conversation in public. And that's that while it's generally unethical to talk about people's neurodiversity, In this case, we'll be talking about ADHD. That's, in my opinion, as a moral philosopher, not the case with public figures who wield enormous political power, right? I can't just make a video tomorrow saying, oh, Ricky Fazioli, who has a YouTube channel about noodles, is ADHD, even though Ricky's never recognized it or been diagnosed with it. Well, that would be completely unethical for me to talk about Ricky Fazioli like that, a fictional YouTube character. But if we're talking about figures of enormous political power, it's absolutely reasonable to talk about their neurodiversity, whether it be autism or, as in this case, allegedly of relevance to this case, ADHD. Now, this is about holding power to account. So it doesn't just cover politicians. This principle also covers anybody who wields enormous power, like Elon Musk, right? About whom it may be challenging to talk about illuminatingly without having a discussion of, allegedly and speculatively, a discussion of autism. And our inability to go there with public figures and political figures often reveals a sort of bizarre situation in the political commentary. And you see this on the otherwise exceptional The Rest is Politics political podcast with Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell, who we're grateful to say both watched the video we did about long COVID. And there, Rory and Alistair talk about an ex-UK Prime Minister, well, essentially describing features of autism, but having no idea what these features really are about, and then being perplexed about what it means that they're encountering these features in an individual. So we've got a situation where our level of neurodiversity literacy is so low in our culture that highly sophisticated people are just epically clueless in a way that actually affects how we understand power being exercised in a critically important way in our societies. Now, let me keep this semi-abstract as I'm trying to do. ADHD can interact with a narcissistic personality badly by fueling it. And allegedly, speculatively, arguably, we may be seeing more of that in recent years, in the case of Trump, than before. Now, because we're speaking about this in public, it's not necessary, but still worth saying that having a narcissistic personality disorder is an ethically culpable thing. Having ADHD is just a neurophysiological state, which is no more ethically culpable than being neurotypical. It's just that having ADHD can sometimes give people remarkable capabilities that neurotypical people don't have, but also very significant and painful disabilities. And that's why I'm, without endorsing all of the lingo of the neurodiversity movement, I'm a huge fan of doing everything in our societies to accommodate neurodiverse people so that they can express their talent properly rather than try to box them into the kind of box that I might fit in as a neurotypical person, right? Because that is not going to be how they work. It's not going to be how they produce the most compelling and incisive labor, whatever labor it is that they're doing. Now, having gone on this tangent, let's come out of it and make a psychological remark about Trump and Musk, and that is that they despise each other. This is just my psychological analysis. Trump thinks that Musk is weird and he has no idea why he's so weird. Back to our previous conversation. And Musk just thinks Trump is an idiot. But they are swallowing their pride here to further their purposes. Ukraine came up, and the usual nothing burger came out of Trump. He said, all I need to do is just tell Vladimir, don't do it, stop doing it. Well, that's how he spoke about hypothetically preventing the war in 2022. And Trump, without being challenged by Joe, and we'll come to Joe in a second, talked about the biggest problem the USA faces being enemies within. I mean, he said that more than once. Now, I believe that this is not revolutionarily beneficial to Trump. And I actually believe that the first half hour of the interview was so bad that it was a net negative for Trump. But unfortunately, having sat through the whole thing, I think it's a net positive for Trump now, because like the McDonald situation, it humanized him. And that happened best when they weren't talking politics, when they were talking about the UFC and boxing, or a couple of other side tangents that were not explicitly political. Now, I am a, creator on this platform with 30, 35, whatever it is now, million views. So I have a perspective of an infinitesimal kind on what this would be like for Joe Rogan. And here we have to recognize the massive, algorithmically powerful incentive for Joe to do this, even though he was really resisting this going there for a long time. But what I'm saying is not that I know how that psychology works for him, and I could be persuaded that he is capable of saying no to this. But I want to say, from my understanding of how this stuff works, just how compelling a proposition that is. How alluring a proposition that is to talk to Trump, and indeed to talk to Harris potentially. Very alluring proposition. Speaking to Trump more so for Joe Rogan at this time. Now, this of course reveals an extraordinary situation, and that is that when I am speaking to you now, the only thing that's going to stop me from being irresponsible is my ethical stability. The algorithm won't. The algorithm will incentivize me to be irresponsible with you. The algorithm incentivizes me to exaggerate how badly Russia is doing, to exaggerate how well Ukraine is doing. It's incentivizing me to exaggerate how well Kamala Harris is doing, right? So it's not that the algorithm is dragging me to do evil things. It's not, but it's certainly dragging me to do irresponsible things, which I'm only not doing because of what I call ethical stability. And I say that because it's not just about having integrity, it's about being stable, which is why most people who have integrity eventually suffer audience and algorithm capture. And part of the reason that small number of you especially are so feeling a healthy relationship with interacting with my content is because you perceive that kind of ethical stability. And apart from that, there are no other filters, right? So these are really people swimming out in the ocean in a completely unbounded way. So where are we going here? Well, we're going to the point that Joe Rogan was completely unprepared for a truthful, interrogative conversation with Trump. And because of Trump's position and his potential position a few weeks from now, you can't just put that aside and say, we'll have a conversation like a couple of lads hanging out. So Joe didn't have the resources to conduct this conversation in a civically responsible way. He may have conducted it in a more responsible way than many other people in his niche who've interviewed Trump in the last few weeks. But essentially, the conversation was a festival of magical thinking. And here an interesting point arises. That for all of the terrible problems with mainstream media, let's take CNN on a bad day, right? And let's attribute to CNN on a bad day a kind of appallingly narrow-sighted ingratiation with US political centrism that completely avoids the crisis of trust in the United States, completely avoids the complicity of Clintonite politics in producing the situation that we have, that is terrifyingly blind to the reality the United States is in, that pretends that we're still in 1998 when we're in 2024, right? All of that blindness and all of that bias to perspectives that reinforce this blindness is still a more professional enterprise than what we witnessed on that podcast conversation between Joe Rogan and Trump. Right? Even the most delusional mainstream centrism embodied in media organizations that don't sufficiently question what's going on in their society and their role in their society. Even that, on a bad day, is more responsible than an average representation of new independent media. Because of the degree of audience capture, because of the degree of algorithmic drift, and because of the degree of institutional detachment, right? Yes, there are a lot of institutional problems with mainstream media. A lot of them are profoundly toxic problems that threaten our democracy, indeed. Doesn't mean you get rid of these institutions, it means you've got to improve them. But that doesn't mean that untethering yourself from this institutional basis is going to, in very many cases, generate a more constructive result at the level of keeping our discourse tethered to the practiced virtue of truthfulness, which is what keeps American and other democracies on the road. Now, just a quick psychological remark about something we'll discuss over the days to come, and that is that for some of you, you don't want to go entertaining the prospect of a Trump victory unless or until it happens. You don't want to go there. But others among you actually need a little bit of prep for it, a sort of a bracing of yourselves for something that may happen. And we'll be talking about that. And talking about that means understanding when to freak out and when not to, and understanding that whatever happens in the next few days, we're on a big arc of democratic decline in the West that affects not just domestic policy but foreign policy, as you all deeply well know. And in the end, it's about balancing the urgency and significance of what we're facing on the day, here and now, versus having a healthy relationship with how we negotiate that arc that is going to last years, if not decades, without freaking out excessively, right, about all the little stops along it, because this is a journey that is not destined to end in catastrophe, right? It's not even destined to end in you losing your democracy. There's a good chance that you'll keep your democracy, right? But there are going to be many stops on that road, and you've got to be balanced about when to freak out and how, and when to try to see that one's on a longer journey and one doesn't want to set one's hair on fire more than is strictly speaking necessary. So I'm just putting on the table a kind of balancing act to which we will speak. Lots and lots of love.